So I get really excited around this time of year. The heat of midsummer is beginning to dissipate a bit, and there is a ton of fresh food around as summer and early fall crops start to roll in. It's no wonder that while food is plentiful and the weather is still favorable, that many cultures across the northern hemisphere choose to celebrate this time of year. So it's really no wonder that the most iconic beer festival in all the world takes place in early fall, Bavaria's ultimate party, Oktoberfest. Oktoberfest may have started as a wedding party for the royalty, but over hundreds of years it has become the most famous beer celebration in all of the world. And there is one beer style that dominates this festival, so much so that here in America the style is often referred to as Oktoberfest, the Märzen. Hey, this is Ryan with Beer by the Numbers, and Märzens are one of my favorite styles of beer. Its copper color and crisp taste lend itself perfectly to the fall weather. And although the Märzen is strongly associated with Oktoberfest, its history goes back quite a bit further than that first wedding party in fall in Bavaria. So let's dive into the history of the Märzen and see just what separates it from other styles in this episode of Beer by the Numbers. Let's get started. To understand the history of the Märzen is to understand the greatest revolution that ever took place in beer brewing in its some 3,000-year history with humanity. Märzens are lagers, meaning that they are beers that are fermented by a strain of yeast that likes to hang out at the bottom of the fermenter. It likes the wort to be a little cooler, and it likes to take its time about eating all of the sugars and turning it into beer. The word lager comes from the German word lagern, meaning to store. In the 18th and 19th centuries, Bavarian and Austrian brewers began experimenting with this brewing techniques. After an initial fermentation period, the beer would be given a second lagering period at a low temperature, stored either in a cool beer cellar or in a mountain cave. They could be kept there for a few weeks or even several months, which gave a lot of time for the beer to mellow out and become incredibly clear. It didn't take long for these refreshing and frankly sexy looking beers to catch on with the drinking public, and lagered beer quickly spread across Central Europe. Lagers basically became a staple of the European diet by the 1850s, and with a late colonial push, spread across the world incredibly quickly from a culinary perspective. Today, every major beer brand around the world is lagered beer. Well, maybe except Guinness, making this change in brewing technique probably the most impactful in humanity's brewing history. The Märzen is like a grandson of these first lagered beers. One of the first consistent lagered beer styles was the Vienna lager, and when the brewers in Munich got a taste of what they were cranking out in Vienna, they knew they had to put their own spin on these great recipes. But due to limits in brewing technology at the time, the ability to brew great beers year-round was basically non-existent. Without refrigeration, it's really hard to brew good beers in the uncontrolled heat of summer, as when yeast gets too hot, they can produce higher alcohols and other compounds that make beer taste really, really nasty. And if you're trying to brew a new lager beer in the summer, forget about it. The cold-loving lager yeasts have almost no chance of getting fermentation going. And in beer quality-obsessed Bavaria, the common sense rule of don't brew in the summer was actually written into their law. Even before lagers came onto the scene, Bavaria had a brewing ordinance in 1553 that beer may only be brewed between September 29th and April 23rd of each year. So when it was getting close to the end of the brewing season in March every year, brewers in Bavaria would make one last lager that was intended to be stored in cellars or caves and saved until the start of the next brewing season in fall, when all the fresh beer supplies were finally running out. Because these lagers were intended to be stored for several months, they were given some unique characteristics. First, they were hopped a little more than other lagers that Bavarians brewed to be consumed fresh. This allowed the beers to stay unspoiled during storage due to hops' antiseptic properties. Second, to hide that extra bitterness, they would use darker malts, more color than you'd see in other lagers like the Pilsner. This lent a darker brown color and a fuller body than most other lagers being brewed at the time. These brews were usually broken out in the early fall when the fresh ales of summer had been consumed, and they were referred to as March beers, or in German, Märzens, as a reference to the month in which they had been brewed. Märzens became pretty popular in Bavaria, and were often a sign of fall harvest and the new brewing season being upon us, so it's no wonder that the first Oktoberfest to celebrate the marriage between Crown Prince Ludwig and Therese of Saxony in 1810, they were drinking brown Märzen beers over the 5 days of festivities. If you looked at these traditional Märzens, they were much darker than the copper-colored lagers we're used to today. In fact, we'd probably consider the beers of the time closer to a Dunkel than a fest beer. That all changed when Josef Seldmayr of Franzkanner introduced an amber-colored lager at the 1872 Oktoberfest festival. Josef combined the traditional Märzen with some Vienna lager recipes and a couple new lagering techniques to produce a delicious, malty, but refreshing copper-colored lager. When his brewery's supply of the traditional Märzen ran low, he broke out the new, lighter copper lager that he called an Urmärzen, translating something like original Märzen in English. And those thirsty revelers loved the stuff. It became so popular, so fast, that other brewers quickly adopted the more amber style in Munich, and the modern Oktoberfest beer was born. Over the next 100 years, the modern version of the style absolutely dominated the festival, and there were even some adaptations created that were much more golden in color. They all have a good balance of malt and hops and offer a refreshing, crisp taste that's perfect for fall. And Märzens have adopted the style name Oktoberfest in many places around the world, especially as the festival enjoyed renewed popularity ever since the 1970s. And although they might not be as malty or dark as they originally were, breweries around the world are brewing them each and every year. Here are a few of the most popular brands you can find out there. The two biggest brands of fest beer from Munich itself would have to be Hofbrau Oktoberfest and Paulaner's Oktoberfest Märzen. If you see pictures from the Munich festival grounds, it's pretty likely that someone is holding one of these two beers in the photo. Another great German fest beer comes from just north of Munich, the Weihenstephaner Fest beer. All three of these German brews are pretty available in larger liquor stores here in the United States, so if you're stateside, be sure to seek these ones out. As far as US-made brands, it seems that fest beers are most popular in the Midwest, with many of the top-rated brands coming from the Great Lakes states. That's not really a huge surprise, as tons of German immigrants made their way to these states in the 1800s. Surlyfest from Surly Brewing in Minneapolis, Minnesota, is one of the top-rated Märzen beers brewed outside of Germany. It pays homage to the traditions of Märzen brewing, while also giving it a fresh spin with some West Coast hops. Three Floyds Brewing out of Munster, Indiana, produces a great Märzen brewed according to the Reinheitsgebot tradition. And probably the most widely distributed Märzen in the US is Sam Adams Oktoberfest. Although it might not be the best beer in the US, it's certainly one of the most widely available in the fall. And if you're looking to get your hands on a beer of this style, Sam Adams Oktoberfest is a solid choice. So if you're a beer lover, give a Märzen or two a shot this fall. It's not only a delicious style of beer, but it also has a rich tradition being born out of the Great Lager Revolution, and it is forever linked to the greatest festival of beer in all the world. What's your favorite Märzen or Oktoberfest beer? Or what other style of beer do you really like drinking in the fall? Let me know down in the comments section below. And while you're down there, be sure to hit that subscribe button to get alerts each and every beer video we publish. Once again, this has been Ryan with Beer by the Numbers, and I'll see you next week with even more festive beer content.